The origin story behind beloved children's novel character Willy Wonka is hitting theaters this month, and while I'll likely be watching to support my boyfriend Timothée Chalamet, the history behind this novel and its author Roald Dahl is messy to say the least. In case you need a refresher, Willy Wonka is the quirky owner of a world-famous chocolate factory, and he's hidden 5 golden tickets in Wonka bars, granting behind-the-scenes access to his curiously under-wraps facility. Charlie Bucket, a boy from a very poor family, finds the final ticket and invites his Grandpa Joe to accompany him to the factory. Grandpa Joe is actually the absolute worst, but that's beside the point. At the factory, Charlie meets Willy Wonka and the Oompa Loompas, along with the other golden ticket winners, who are 4 insufferable children joined by their equally insufferable parents. During their tour of the whimsical facilities, each of the obnoxious children get removed one by one for being greedy little brats. Charlie, as the last one standing and having passed all of Wonka's tests, becomes the chocolatier's heir. This book is just one of many wildly successful works from Roald Dahl's corpus, which also includes Matilda, James and the Giant Peach, and Fantastic Mr. Fox. But then why is this author and this novel in particular so controversial? Here's an abbreviated history of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. It turns out that Charlie Bucket, the book's main protagonist, was originally black in an early draft titled Charlie's Chocolate Boy. While this book is steeped in criticism regarding race, this draft is not where that comes from. Of course, this white man probably isn't the person to be offering allegories on blackness in the 1960s, but ultimately his friend and literary agent Sheila St. Lawrence shot the draft down, worrying that a black Charlie would hurt readership. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory went on to be published in 1964. In this original version, the Oompa Loompas were drawn and described as African pygmies, a group of ethnically diverse people native to Central Africa. It's important to note that the term pygmy is often used in a pejorative manner, and when referring to these groups collectively, many scholars, activists, and members of these ethnic groups themselves prefer terms like Central African hunter-gatherer populations. Dahl's writing is extremely dehumanizing. As Wonka says, and I quote, "They are real people that he imported direct from Africa." Through Wonka, Dahl paints a picture of, you guessed it, slavery, that's somehow justified by having saved the Oompa Loompas from starvation and smuggling them to England to work for him in exchange for housing and cacao beans. When it was announced a few years later that the book would be adapted into a film, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People released a statement expressing concern for the similarities between how the Oompa Loompas are treated and slavery. When the 1971 film starring Gene Wilder entitled Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory premiered, the Oompa Loompas had orange skin and green hair. By 1973, reprints of the original book had been revised, now describing the Oompa Loompas as more like little hippies having golden brown hair and rosy white skin. This was far from Dahl's only run-in with accusations of racism, and when a number of his explicitly anti-Semitic remarks resurfaced a few years ago, his family released a statement apologizing for the lasting and understandable hurt his words caused. Moral of the story, don't meet your heroes, people. Even in the 21st century, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory found itself at the center of controversy. In 2014, a 50th anniversary edition was published that sparked outrage. The new edition was intended to target an adult market, and the cover featured an image of a doll-like little girl. It was met with backlash for not only the sexualized image of a child, but also having seemingly little to do with the actual story, like what were we going for here? The most recent drama surrounding Charlie and the Chocolate Factory just occurred this year. Publisher Puffin Books was accused of censorship after making revisions to Dahl's children's books, according to a sensitivity review. For Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, this meant making 80 additional revisions to the original text, like removing or changing every inclusion of the word fat, most references to the Oompa Loompas' physical appearance, and words like mad, crazy, and queer. This review was done in partnership with Inclusive Minds, an organization that provides insights to make children's literature more accessible and inclusive. The changes to Dahl's works caused quite the stir. Even many people who deemed the original language offensive found the revisions to undermine both reality and Dahl's artistry. On the other hand, modifications to meet our present-day sensibilities can keep this story beloved for generations to come. I'd hope most people would agree that the 1973 revisions to remove the literal enslavement of black people was a good call, but the crucial difference here was that the actual author made these revisions. It turns out that Dahl was not a fan of the 1971 film adaptation, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. First and foremost, he resented the centering of Willy Wonka over Charlie. While he was credited with writing the screenplay, screenwriter David Seltzer made significant changes. And while the film became a cult classic, it was originally a box office disappointment. Then in 1998, Warner Brothers reached an agreement with Dahl's estate to produce another film. Tim Burton signed on to direct, drawn to the project for Dahl's, quote, politically incorrect views, and drew inspiration from the original 1964 edition. The actor Deep Roy, who's of Indian origin, was cast and digitally replicated to play the Oompa Loompas. Burton's choice to cast a brown actor does seem to align more closely with the 1964 Oompa Loompa descriptions, as it's quite a departure from the 1971 film and later editions of the book, but we can just save our conversation about race and Tim Burton's filmography for another day. Fast forward to today, and Dahl's genius chocolatier is making his way back to the big screen with Wonka. The film, directed by Paul King, releases in the US on December 15th, and has already faced its own criticism. George Coppin, an actor with dwarfism, has criticized the filmmakers for casting Hugh Grant as an Oompa Loompa, rather than giving the role to an actual little person. Regardless, the prequel is already receiving critical acclaim. Despite its many valid censures and controversies in its near 60 years, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory has endured as an adored story for all ages, even if that tunnel scene is pure nightmare fuel.
There's no earthly way of knowing
He's singing.
which direction we are going.